Victoria Sterling stood outside the towering glass building in downtown Chicago, her hands trembling as she clutched the foreclosure notice. The autumn wind whipped through her long auburn hair, and she pulled her worn coat tighter around her slender frame. At 27, she had never imagined her life would come to this moment of absolute desperation. The letter in her hands spelled out the harsh reality in cold. Legal terms? 30 days to pay off the medical debt that had accumulated during her mother's cancer treatment, or lose the only home she had ever known. Grace Sterling had fought bravely against the disease. Thankfully, it was now in remission. But the financial cost had been devastating. Victoria's salary as an art teacher at the local high school barely covered their basic needs, let alone the crushing weight of hospital bills. She had already sold everything of value, worked weekend jobs, and applied for every loan she could find. Nothing had been enough. The glass tower Cross Industries occupied the top 15 floors of the gleaming skyscraper before her. Damien Cross, the company's enigmatic founder and CEO, is known throughout the business world for his ruthless efficiency and incredible wealth. What most people didn't know was that Victoria's late father had been Cross's business partner in the early days. Before everything fell apart, the marble lobby was intimidating in its perfection. Victoria's reflection in the polished floors showed a young woman who looked out of place among the expensive suits and designer handbags. Her simple black dress and modest heels had been her best attempt at looking professional. But she felt like a sparrow among eagles. The receptionist's smile was polite, but distant as she directed Victoria to the executive elevator. The ride to the 42nd floor felt endless, her heart hammering against her ribs with each passing floor. She had practiced her speech 100 times, but now her mind felt completely blank. The cold CEO, the elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed power and money. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Chicago's skyline, while modern art pieces that probably cost more than Victoria's annual salary adorned the walls. A sharp-suited assistant escorted her through glass corridors to the corner office. When the heavy doors opened, Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Damien Cross stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the massive windows. Even from behind, his presence was commanding. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair was perfectly styled, and his charcoal suit fit him like it had been crafted by master tailors. When he turned around, Victoria felt her knees weaken. His face was devastatingly handsome in a way that belonged on magazine covers, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. But those eyes held no warmth, no hint of human compassion. They were calculating, cold, and completely focused on her. Miss Sterling. His voice was deep and smooth, like aged whiskey, but there was no emotion in it. Please, sit. Victoria sank into the leather chair across from his enormous desk, acutely aware of how small she felt in this space. The office was impersonal, lacking any photographs or personal touches that might hint at the man behind the businessman. The proposition, I know why you're here, Damien said, settling into his chair with fluid grace. Your father's debts have come full circle. Victoria's eyes widened. My father paid his debts to you years ago, did he? Damien opened a file on his desk, and Victoria could see pages of financial documents. Thomas Sterling borrowed heavily from my father to start his construction business. When it failed, he couldn't repay. My father forgave the debt out of friendship, but debts have a way of transferring through generations. That's not legally binding, Victoria protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps not. But your current medical debt is. He slid another document across the desk. I purchased your mother's medical debt from the hospital. All of it. Victoria's blood ran cold as she saw the astronomical figure at the bottom of the page. It was even larger than she had feared. Why would you do that? For the first time, something flickered in Damien's eyes. Because I have a proposition for you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she waited for him to continue. I need a wife, he said finally, his words clinical and precise. Not for love. Not for companionship. For business purposes. The board of directors and my investors prefer their CEO to appear stable, settled. A bachelor approaching his 30s raises questions about commitment and reliability. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. You want to marry me for appearances? It would be a contract marriage. 1 year, with specific terms and conditions. In return, all your debts would be cleared. Your mother would receive the finest medical care money can buy, and you would be compensated handsomely for your time. This is insane, Victoria whispered, but even as she said it, she could feel the trap closing around her. What choice did she have? The contract. Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. Think of it as a business arrangement. You would live in my home, appear at necessary social functions, and maintain the facade of a happy marriage. In private, we would live separate lives. And after a year, a quiet divorce, you keep that compensation, a house of your choosing, and a trust fund that will ensure you never face financial hardship again. Victoria's mind raced. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What aren't you telling me? Something dark flashed across Damien's features. My personal life is complicated. There are aspects that must remain private, even from a contract wife. Can you accept that? The weight of her mother's medical bills and the foreclosure notice in her purse pressed down on her like a physical burden. Victoria thought of Grace Sterling, who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's education and happiness. How could she let her mother lose their home after everything she had endured? I need time to think, Victoria said, though they both knew she had already made her decision. You have until tomorrow morning, Damien replied, sliding a thick contract across the desk. Read it carefully. If you agree, we'll be married within the week. The decision that night, Victoria sat at her mother's bedside in their small, cluttered home. Grace was sleeping peacefully, her face pale but serene. The cancer treatment had aged her beyond her 55 years, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Victoria had read the contract 3 times. The terms were generous, almost impossibly so. She would receive a monthly allowance that was more than her annual teaching salary, plus a final settlement that would set her up for life. Her mother would be moved to a private facility with round decla care. The restrictions were minimal. Attend social functions as required. Maintain the appearance of a loving wife in public. And never speak to the media about their arrangement. She would have her own suite of rooms in his mansion. Complete privacy when not needed for appearances. There was one clause that made her pause. The wife agrees to be discreet about any aspects of the husband's private life she may discover. During the term of this agreement, what secrets was Damien Cross hiding? Moving day 3 days later, Victoria found herself standing before the wrought iron gates of the Cross estate. The marriage ceremony had been a cold, clinical affair at City Hall, with only 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Damien had slipped a massive diamond ring onto her finger without ceremony. She had signed her name as Victoria Cross for the first time. Now, looking up at the imposing mansion, she felt like she was entering another world. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. Mrs. Harper, the housekeeper, greeted her at the door. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile that was the first genuine human warmth Victoria had encountered since this strange journey began. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," she said, and Victoria winced at the unfamiliar title. "Mr. Cross is in meetings until this evening, but I'll show you to your rooms." The house was even more impressive inside. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and priceless art adorned the walls. It was beautiful, but cold, like a museum rather than a home. Victoria's suite was larger than her entire previous house. The bedroom featured a king-sized bed with silk sheets, a sitting area with a fireplace, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony. The bathroom was a study in luxury, with a marble-soaking tub and a shower that looked like it belonged. In a spa, dinner is served at 7, Mrs. Harper informed her. Mr. Cross prefers punctuality. As the housekeeper left, Victoria sank onto the bed and stared at the diamond ring on her finger. It was stunning, probably worth more than most people made in a lifetime. But it felt heavy and foreign on her hand. The first evening, Victoria changed into the one nice dress she owned, a simple navy blue number that had been her go-to for school events. Looking at herself in the ornate mirror, she felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The dining room was formal and intimidating, with a table that could seat 20 people. 2 place settings sat at one end, separated by enough space to make conversation awkward. Damien was already seated when she arrived, having changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. He stood when she entered, a gesture that surprised her with its old-fashioned courtesy. "I hope you're settling in comfortably." "Yes, thank you. The rooms are beautiful." Victoria took her seat across from him, hyper-aware of every movement. Dinner was served by silent staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The food was exquisite, prepared by what was obviously a professional chef, but Victoria could barely taste it. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. "Tell me about yourself," Damien said finally, his gray eyes studying her over his wineglass. "There isn't much to tell. I teach art at Lincoln High School. I live quietly. I take care of my mother." Victoria set down her fork, suddenly feeling foolish. "What about you?" "I work. I travel for business. I prefer solitude," his answers were as guarded as hers had been open. "This arrangement," Victoria said carefully, "it seems extreme just for business appearances." Something shuddered in Damien's expression. "Our reasons are my own, Mrs. Cross, as are yours, I imagine." The formal use of her new married name stung more than it should have. This man was a stranger, and he would remain one if he had his way. Night sounds that first night in the mansion, Victoria lay awake in her luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was completely silent. So different from her old home where she could hear her mother's gentle snoring and the familiar creaks and settling sounds. Around midnight, she heard something that made her sit up straight. Music, soft and hauntingly beautiful, drifted through the walls, sounded like a lullaby, played on piano with extraordinary skill and tenderness. Victoria slipped out of bed and opened her door quietly. The music was coming from somewhere deeper in the house, down corridors she hadn't yet explored. Following the sound, she found herself in an unfamiliar wing of the mansion. The music stopped abruptly, and Victoria heard voices. A woman's voice, gentle and soothing, and something that made her heart skip a beat. A child's voice, sweet and innocent. "One more song, please," the small voice pleaded. "Very late, sweetheart. Tomorrow, I promise." Victoria pressed herself against the wall, her mind reeling. Damien had a child? Why hadn't he mentioned this? More importantly, why was it a secret? She tried to retreat quietly, but her foot caught on a small table, sending a decorative vase tumbling to the floor. The crash seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. Footsteps approached rapidly, and a door flew open. A woman in her 40s appeared, her face kind but concerned. Behind her, Victoria caught a glimpse of a little girl with dark curls and enormous gray eyes that were unmistakably familiar. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice protective. "I'm Victoria. I'm Damien's wife." The words still felt strange on her tongue. The little girl peered around the woman's skirts, her curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Daddy got married?" Before Victoria could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Damien appeared, his face thunderous with anger. He had thrown on a robe over his pajamas, and his dark hair was disheveled, making him look more human than Victoria had yet seen him. "Victoria." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You weren't supposed to be here." "I heard music." Victoria lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Curiosity can be dangerous in this house," he replied, his gray eyes flashing. The little girl stepped forward, her innocent face tilted up toward. "Victoria, are you going to be my new mommy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. This beautiful, curious child was Damien's secret. And suddenly Victoria understood why he had been so guarded about his private life. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Victoria asked softly, kneeling down to the child's level. "Sophie." "Cross." The little girl smiled, revealing a gap where she had lost a front tooth. "Sophie," Damien said firmly. "It's very late. Mrs. Harper will take you back to bed." But Sophie had already moved closer to Victoria, her small hand reaching out to touch the stranger's face with the fearless affection that only children possessed. "You're pretty," Sophie announced. "Do you like stories?" "I have lots of books." Victoria's heart melted completely. I love stories. I'm a teacher, so I read them all the time. Really? What kind of stories? Sophie. Damien's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Bed now. The little girl's face fell, and she looked. Between her father and Victoria with confusion, Mrs. Harper stepped forward gently, taking Sophie's hand. Come along, dear. We'll see about stories another time. As they disappeared down the hallway, Victoria stood slowly, very aware of Damien's imposing presence beside her. When she looked at him, the cold mask had slipped completely, revealing raw emotion she hadn't expected. She doesn't know about our arrangement, he said quietly. Obviously. Victoria crossed her arms. What else don't I know about this situation? Damien ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly looking exhausted. More than you realize. If you're smart, you'll leave it that way. But as Victoria looked into his stormy gray eyes, she knew it was already too late for that. The moment she had seen Sophie's innocent face and heard the pain in Damien's voice, everything had changed. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was a family, broken and guarded, but a family nonetheless. And despite every logical reason to keep her distance, Victoria found herself wanting to understand the man who played lullabies in the dark and hid his daughter from the world. The contract marriage she had entered was about to become much more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and the sound of childish laughter echoing from the gardens below. She wrapped herself in a silk robe and stepped onto her balcony to see Sophie playing with a golden retriever on the perfectly manicured lawn. Mrs. Harper, watching from nearby, the little girl looked up and waved enthusiastically when she spotted Victoria. Good morning, Victoria. Come play with us. Before Victoria could respond, Damien appeared on the terrace below, his expression stern. Sophie, breakfast is ready. Go wash your hands. The child's face fell, but she obediently ran toward the house. With the dog at her heels, Damien's eyes found Victoria on the balcony, and even from a distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. 20 minutes later, Victoria made her way to the breakfast room, unsure of what to expect. She found Damien alone at the table, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit. Reading financial reports while sipping black coffee. Good morning, she said carefully, taking the seat across from him. He looked up briefly, his gray eyes unreadable. We need to establish some ground rules. Victoria's heart sank. She had hoped that last night's discovery might have softened him somehow, but his voice was as cold as ever. Sophie is not part of our arrangement, he continued, setting down his papers. She doesn't understand the nature of our marriage, and I intend to keep it that way. You will not form attachments, and you will not interfere with how I raise my daughter. She's just a child, Damien. She needs protection from people who will leave her. He cut her off sharply. You'll be gone in less than a year. I won't have her heart broken by someone who was never meant to stay. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Victoria realized this wasn't just about protecting Sophie. Damien was protecting himself too. The story unfolds despite Damien's warnings. Victoria found herself drawn to the little girl. Sophie had a way of appearing wherever Victoria was, full of questions and innocent curiosity. During the day, while Damien was at the office, the child would seek her out in the library or garden. My daddy says you're a teacher, Sophie said. One afternoon, curled up beside Victoria on the library sofa. Can you teach me to paint? I love colors. Victoria's heart squeezed. I'd love to, sweetheart, but we should ask your father first. He's always busy, Sophie said with a child's matter-of-fact acceptance of disappointment. He used to read to me more before Mommy went to heaven. The casual mention of Sophie's mother hit Victoria like a physical blow. Tell me about your mommy. Sophie's face lit up. She was beautiful, like a princess. She had long dark hair and she smelled like flowers. She used to sing to me and paint my nails pink. The little girl's expression grew sad, but then she got sick and had to go live with the angels. Victoria pulled Sophie closer, her heart breaking for this innocent child who had lost so much. I'm sure she loved you very much.
Daddy says she's watching over me from heaven.
I think I can feel her hugging me when I'm scared. That evening, Victoria confronted Damien in his study. He was working late again, his desk covered with contracts and financial reports. The room smelled of leather and his expensive cologne, and the warm light from his desk lamp softened his harsh features. "We need to talk about Sophie," she said, closing the door behind her. Damien didn't look up from his papers. "I thought I made my position clear. She told me about her mother. Cancer." His pen stilled in his hand, and when he finally looked up, Victoria saw raw pain flash across his features before he quickly masked it. "Catherine died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought for 18 months, but ... double quotes. He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating for both of you. Sophie was only 3. She barely remembers her mother now. Which is probably for the best." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Victoria could see the lie in his eyes. "Is that why you hide her from the world? To protect her from more loss?" Damien's eyes flashed dangerously. "I hide her because the world is cruel, because people use children as weapons, as leverage, because every time she's photographed or mentioned in the media, she becomes a target for kidnappers, gold diggers, and anyone else who wants to hurt me." Victoria sank into the chair across from his desk. "She's lonely, Damien. A child needs more than protection. She needs love, attention, normal experiences. She has everything she needs, does she? When was the last time you played with her? Really played, not just supervised her from a distance?" Damien's hands clenched into fists on his desk. "I give her everything money can buy, but not yourself." Victoria leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "She misses you. She misses having a father who's present, not just a provider. You don't understand?" His voice cracked slightly. "Every time I look at her, I see Catherine, see my failures, my inability to save the woman I loved. Sophie deserves better than a father who's haunted by ghosts." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as she finally understood the depth of Damien's torment, growing closer. Over the following weeks, something began to shift in the mansion. Despite Damien's protests, Victoria started spending more time with Sophie, teaching her to paint and read stories. The little girl blossomed under the attention, her laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. Victoria also began to see glimpses of the man Damien had been before grief hardened him. Sometimes she would catch him watching Sophie from doorways, his expression soft with love. Other times, she would find him in the music room late at night, playing the piano with a skill that spoke of years of training and a soul that needed the outlet of melody. One evening, Victoria was reading to Sophie in the child's bedroom when Damien appeared in the doorway. Instead of his usual stern interruption, he lingered, listening to Victoria's animated voices for the different characters. "And then the brave princess defeated the dragon and saved the kingdom," Victoria concluded, closing the book. "I like that story," Sophie said sleepily. "Victoria, will you read to me tomorrow too?" "If your father says it's okay." Sophie looked at Damien with hopeful eyes. "Please, Daddy." Victoria makes the best voices. Something shifted in Damien's expression. "We'll see, sweetheart. Time for sleep now." As Victoria tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl threw her arms around her neck. "I love you, Victoria. I wish you could be my mommy for real." The innocent words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She glanced at Damien and saw him stiffen, his jaw clenching with suppressed emotion. "Sweet dreams, Sophie," Victoria whispered, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead. In the hallway, Damien caught her arm. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She's getting attached." "Would that be so terrible?" Victoria challenged. "She's a sweet, loving child who deserves to feel loved in return. By someone who's going to leave her in 9 months." The question hung between them, and Victoria realized she no longer had a simple answer. The thought of leaving Sophie, of walking away from this broken family, made her chest tight with unexpected pain. Elena's return, their fragile routine, was shattered on a rainy Thursday evening, when Victoria answered the door to find a stunning woman with platinum blonde hair and perfectly applied makeup. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly teaching salary, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "You must be the new wife," the woman said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm Elena Martinez, Damien's former fiancée." Victoria's blood ran cold. Damien had never mentioned a fiancée. Elena pushed past Victoria without invitation, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Where is he? We have important matters to discuss. Before Victoria could respond, Damien appeared at the top of the grand staircase. His face went pale when he saw Elena, and Victoria felt a stab of jealousy at the obvious history between them. Elena, what are you doing here? Hello, darling? Elena's smile was predatory. Aren't you going to introduce me to your wife? Victoria felt like an outsider watching a play she didn't understand. Damien descended the stairs slowly, his movements controlled but tense. Victoria, this is Elena Martinez. Elena, my wife. Victoria? How... quaint. Elena's eyes swept over Victoria dismissively, though I suppose she serves your purposes well enough. Young, innocent, easily controlled. That's enough, Damien said sharply. Say what you came to say and leave. Elena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Still so direct. Very well. I'm pregnant, Damien. The baby is yours. The words hit the room like a bomb. Victoria felt the world tilt beneath her feet, and she had to grip the stair railing for support. Damien's face went completely white. That's impossible, he whispered. Is it? Remember that night 6 months ago? You were so drunk after the Chandler acquisition, so lonely and desperate for comfort? Elena's smile was triumphant. I have the medical records if you need proof. She'd been a fool to think this arrangement could ever be anything more than a business transaction. Of course, Damien had other women? Of course, their marriage was exactly what he had said it was. A cold contract. I need to think about this, Damien said, his voice hollow. Think quickly. I'm 3 months along, and decisions need to be made. Elena's eyes found Victoria again. I do hope this doesn't complicate your little arrangement too much, dear. The confrontation that night, Victoria packed her bags with shaking hands. She had been living in a fantasy, imagining that the stolen glances and moments of tenderness she had witnessed meant something. But Elena's news had shattered those illusions completely. She was zipping up her suitcase when Damien burst into her room without knocking. Where are you going, home? To my real life. Victoria didn't trust herself to look at him. This arrangement is over. We have a contract, sue me. Thanks. She finally faced him, and the pain in her chest intensified when she saw his disheveled appearance. His hair was messed up from running his hands through it, his shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were wild with emotion. Victoria, please. Let me explain. Explain what? That you're going to be a father? That you slept with your ex-fiancé while married to me? Her voice cracked on the last words. It's not what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. Was never real anyway, right? Just a business arrangement? The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Damien stepped closer, his voice desperate. It stopped being just business the moment I watched you with Sophie. The moment I saw you bring life back into this house? Victoria's heart stuttered, but she forced herself to remain strong. Your daughter is going to have a sibling. Lena is beautiful, sophisticated, everything I'm not. Maybe you should. I don't love Elena. The words exploded from him. I never loved Elena. What we had was convenience, mutual benefit. She's ambitious, calculating everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Then why? Because I was drunk and stupid and missing something I didn't even know I wanted until you walked into my life. His hands reached for her, then fell to his sides. You brought warmth into this cold house? You made Sophie laugh again. It made me remember what it felt like to be human. Victoria's resolve wavered, but the image of Elena's triumphant smile strengthened her determination. It doesn't matter now. She's having your baby. We'll figure it out, together. There is no together, Damien. There never was. Victoria picked up her suitcase. Take care of Sophie. She deserves better than this. She made it to the door before his broken voice stopped her. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. Victoria closed her eyes. Her hand on the doorknob? No, you don't. You love the idea of having a mother for Sophie. You love having someone to fill the empty spaces in your life. But you don't love me? She opened the door. Goodbye, Damien. The revelation Victoria had been back in her small apartment for 3 days when Mrs. Harper called. The older woman's voice was urgent, worried. Mrs. Cross, you need to come back. Something's happened. I'm not Mrs. Cross anymore, Victoria said wearily. And whatever it is, I can't help. It's about Miss Elena. Mr. Cross discovered something important. Sophie has been asking for you constantly, and Mr. Cross. He's not himself. Doria's heart clenched at the mention of Sophie. Is she okay? She's confused and heartbroken. She doesn't understand why you left. She thinks she did something wrong. The thought of Sophie blaming herself for Victoria's departure was unbearable. Tell her it's not her fault. Tell her I had to take care of something important. Don't you tell her yourself? Come back, dear. At least hear what Mr. Cross discovered about Elena.
That's against her better judgment.
Victoria found herself driving back to the mansion that evening. Mrs. Harper met her at the door with obvious relief. He's in his study. He's been there for 2 days straight, barely eating. Victoria found Damien slumped over his desk, surrounded by documents and legal papers. He looked terrible, his face haggard and his eyes red with exhaustion. When he saw her, he straightened so quickly he knocked over his coffee cup. "Victoria, you came back?" Mrs. Harper said there was something about Elena. Damien stood slowly, pulling a folder from his desk. She lied. About everything. He handed her a medical report, and Victoria's eyes widened as she read. She's not pregnant? She was never pregnant. The medical records were falsified. I hired a private investigator, and he uncovered everything. Damien's voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. She's been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to cause maximum damage. Victoria sank into a chair, overwhelmed. But why? Because I refused to take her back after Catherine died. Because I chose to protect my heart instead of giving her another chance to break it. He sat on the edge of his desk, closer to her than he had ever been. She knew about our arrangement, knew it was supposed to be temporary. She thought she could drive you away and step back into my life. How did she know about our marriage? Contract? I'm still investigating that. But Victoria, what matters now is that you know the truth. His voice broke. I love you. Not as a convenience, not as a replacement for Catherine, not as a mother for Sophie. I love you for who you are, for the light you brought into our lives. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Damien... I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've been cold and distant and impossible to love. But you changed me, made me want to be the man Sophie deserves as a father, the man you deserve as a husband. Before Victoria could respond, small footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. Victoria, you came back. The little girl launched herself across the room and into Victoria's arms. Victoria hugged Sophie tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I missed you so much, sweetheart. I thought you left because I was bad. Daddy was so sad, and Mrs. Harper kept crying when she thought I wasn't looking. You weren't bad, Sophie. You're perfect. Victoria pulled back to look into the child's gray eyes. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and say things they don't mean. Sophie looked between Victoria and her father with the perceptive wisdom that children sometimes possess. Are you going to stay now? For real this time? Victoria's eyes met Damien's. Over Sophie's head, she saw love there, real and deep and terrifying in its intensity. But she also saw fear, vulnerability, and hope. That depends, Victoria said softly, on whether your daddy really wants me to stay. Damien dropped to his knees beside them, his arms encircling both Victoria and Sophie. I want you to stay forever. Both of you are my family now, my heart. I can't imagine life without either of you. Sophie clapped her hands with delight. Does da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This means Victoria can really be my mommy now. Victoria looked at Damien, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. What do you think, Daddy? I think, Damien said, his voice thick with emotion, that would make me the luckiest man in the world. As he kissed Victoria softly, with Sophie giggling between them, Victoria finally understood what home felt like. It wasn't a place or a contract or arrangement. It was this. Love freely given, trust carefully rebuilt, and a family chosen by the heart rather than bound by law. The contract that had brought them together was forgotten, placed by something far more binding and beautiful. Love, real and lasting, had conquered all their fears and walls and doubts, and in that moment, Victoria knew she was exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks after Elena's deception was exposed, Victoria found herself standing in the mansion's rose garden on a perfect spring morning. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. Sunlight filtered through the trees, creating dancing patterns on the stone pathways. She had been living back at the mansion, but everything felt different now. All the walls that had once seemed cold and imposing now felt warm and welcoming. Damien was different too, more open, more present. He had started joining her and Sophie for breakfast every morning, reading bedtime stories at night, and even teaching his daughter to play piano. Victoria was sketching the garden when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Damien approaching, but he wasn't alone. Sophie was with him, practically bouncing with excitement and clutching something behind her back. "Victoria," Damien said, and his voice was nervous in a way she had never heard before. "We have something to ask you." Sophie could barely contain herself. "Tell her, Daddy. Tell her now." Damien smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, then took Victoria's hands in his. "The contract that brought us together was based on lies and desperation. And fear. But what we have now, what we've built together, that's real." Victoria's heart began to race as Damien dropped to one knee in the soft grass. Sophie immediately knelt beside him, her face glowing with joy. "Victoria Sterling Cross," Damien continued, his voice stronger now. "You brought love back into our lives when we had given up hope. You made us a family not through obligation or convenience, but through the sheer force of your beautiful heart." Sophie pulled her hand from behind her back, revealing a small velvet box. "We picked it out together," she announced proudly. Damien opened the box to reveal a ring that took Victoria's breath away. It wasn't the massive diamond from their contract marriage, but something far more beautiful. A vintage sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds, delicate and timeless. "This was Catherine's grandmother's ring," Damien said softly. "She would have wanted Sophie to give it to someone who loves her as much as we do, someone who loves us enough to stay forever." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this man who had learned to open his heart, and this precious child who had accepted her so completely. "Will you marry me?" Damien asked. "Really marry me? For love? For family? For the rest of our lives?" "Yes," Victoria whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Sophie squealed with delight as Damien slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The wedding of dreams, their second wedding, was everything the first had not been. Instead of a cold courthouse ceremony, they exchanged vows in the mansion's garden on a warm June evening, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Grace Sterling sat in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched her daughter marry for love. The cancer treatments had been successful, and she was healthier than she had been in years. Mrs. Harper sat beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sophie was the flower girl, wearing a dress of soft pink silk that she had helped choose. She took her role very seriously, scattering rose petals with the concentration of someone performing a sacred duty. Victoria wore a gown of ivory, silk that flowed around her like liquid moonlight. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elegant style, with small white roses woven through the curls. But it was her smile that made her truly radiant. The smile of a woman who had found her place in the world. Damien stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but his eyes never left Victoria's face. When she reached him, he took her hands with a gentleness that spoke of reverence and deep love. "Da, da, 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 da. You came into my life like sunlight after the longest winter," he said during his vows, his voice clear and strong. "You taught me that love doesn't make us weak, it makes us brave. You showed me that opening our hearts to others doesn't guarantee pain, it guarantees meaning." Victoria's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "You were afraid to love again, and I was afraid. I wasn't worthy of love. Together we learned that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being perfectly honest with each other. You and Sophie are my heart, my home, my forever." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Damien's kiss was tender and full of promise. Sophie cheered from the front row, clapping her hands with unbridled joy. The honeymoon, they honeymooned. In Tuscany, just the three of them, in a villa overlooking rolling hills covered with vineyards and olive groves. It was Sophie's first trip to Europe, and her wonder at everything she saw filled each day with laughter and discovery. Victoria painted watercolors of the landscape, while Sophie chased butterflies through the gardens, ain't freed from the constant pressure of business, relaxed in a way Victoria had never seen. He played endless games of hide-and-seek with Sophie, taught her Italian phrases, and held Victoria close as they watched sunsets paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. One evening, as Sophie slept between them in the large bed, she had insisted on sharing their room. Afraid of being alone in a strange place, Damien traced patterns on Victoria's bare shoulder. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he whispered against her hair. "Neither did I," Victoria replied, turning in his arms. "6 months ago, I was just trying to survive. Now I feel like I'm really living for the first time." They made love that night with a passion that was both gentle and fierce, their bodies speaking what words could never fully express. In the darkness of the Italian villa, with Sophie sleeping peacefully beside them, they created not just pleasure, but a bond that would last lifetimes, building a life. Back home in Chicago, they settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Victoria returned to teaching, but now at a private school closer to home that allowed her more flexibility. Damien restructured his business to spend more time. With his family delegating responsibilities, he had once insisted on handling himself. Sophie thrived with 2 parents who were present and engaged. She started taking art lessons with Victoria, piano lessons with Damien, and dance classes at the local studio. The lonely, quiet child gradually transformed into a confident, joyful little girl who filled their home with laughter and chatter. Victoria converted one of the mansion's unused rooms into an art studio, where she could paint, and where Sophie could create her own masterpieces. The walls were soon covered with the child's colorful drawings, most of them featuring stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Me. Their physical relationship deepened and intensified as emotional barriers fell away completely. Damien was an attentive and passionate lover, worshiping Victoria's body with the same focus he had once brought to business deals. Victoria discovered a sensual side of herself she hadn't known existed. Reveling in the way Damien's touch could make her feel both cherished and desired, they made love everywhere in the mansion. In their bedroom, with its fireplace, casting, dancing, shadows in the library among towering bookshelves. In the conservatory surrounded by blooming flowers, and once memorably, in Damien's study, after Sophie had gone to bed and they couldn't wait to get upstairs, the growing family a year after their real wedding, Victoria began to feel tired and nauseous. At first, she attributed it to a busy schedule, but when the symptoms persisted, she made a doctor's appointment. The pregnancy test was positive. Victoria stared at the results in the doctor's office, her heart pounding with excitement and terror. She thought of Sophie, who had been asking for a baby brother or sister. She thought of Damien, who had become such a wonderful father to the daughter he already had. That evening, she planned a special dinner. She cooked Damien's favorite meal and set the table with their best china. When he arrived home from work, he found candles lit and soft music playing. "What's the occasion?" he asked, pulling her into his arms for a kiss. "Sit down first, Victoria," said, her voice shaking with nervous excitement. Sophie was already at the table, practically vibrating with the secret Victoria had shared with her earlier. "Tell him, Victoria. Tell him about the surprise." Damien looked between them, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right?" Victoria pulled a small wrapped box from behind her back and placed it in front of him. "Open it." Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes in soft yellow, along with an ultrasound photo. Damien stared at the contents for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally pure joy. "You're pregnant," he whispered. "We're having a baby," Sophie announced, unable to contain herself any longer. "I'm going to be a big sister." Damien stood so quickly his chair nearly toppled over. He crossed to Victoria and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed with delight. "I love you," he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too," Victoria replied, and gasped as his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was both celebration and promise. The birth 8 months later, Victoria woke in the pre-dawn hours with sharp pains in her back. By the time Damien rushed her to the hospital, her contractions were coming fast and strong. Sophie stayed with Mrs. Harper, but not before extracting promises that she would be called the moment her baby brother or sister arrived. The labor was intense but relatively quick. Damien never left Victoria's side, holding her hand through each contraction, whispering words of love and encouragement. When she felt like she couldn't go on, he reminded her of their journey, of how far they had come, of the beautiful family they were creating together. Their son was born just as the sun was rising, screaming his displeasure at being removed from his warm, safe cocoon. The moment the doctor placed him on Victoria's chest, both parents were overwhelmed with emotion. "He's perfect," Damien whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Look at him, Victoria. He's absolutely perfect." The baby had Victoria's auburn hair and Damien's gray eyes, and when he wrapped his tiny fist around his father's finger, Damien broke down completely. They named him Gabriel Thomas Cross. After Victoria's father and the angel who announced new beginnings, Sophie meets her brother when Sophie first met Gabriel. She was dressed in her best dress and carried a teddy bear nearly as big as she was. "He's so little," she whispered in awe, looking down at her sleeping brother. "Can I hold him?" Victoria helped position Sophie in the hospital bed beside her, carefully placing Gabriel in his big sister's arms. Sophie's face was a study in concentration and wonder as she looked down at the baby. "Hi, Gabriel," she said softly. "I'm your big sister Sophie. I'm going to teach you everything I know, and I'm going to protect you always." Gabriel opened his eyes at the sound of her voice, and Sophie gasped with delight. "He's looking at me. He knows I'm his sister." Damien sat on the edge of the bed, his arms encircling his entire family. "He's lucky to have you as a sister, sweetheart. You're going to be the best big sister in the world, the perfect family." First few months with Gabriel were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the particular exhaustion that comes with caring for a newborn. But they were also filled with moments of such pure joy that Victoria sometimes felt her heart might burst from happiness. Sophie was indeed a wonderful big sister, always wanting to help with bottles and diaper changes. She would sing to Gabriel when he cried, read him stories, even though he was too young to understand, and insisted on kissing him goodnight every evening. Damien was a hands-on father from the beginning, taking night feedings so Victoria could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of his existence. Their love life adapted to include their growing family. Stolen moments during Gabriel's naps became precious and intense. The exhaustion of new parenthood was offset by a deeper intimacy, a connection forged through the shared experience of creating and nurturing life together. On Gabriel's first birthday, they held a party in the mansion's garden. Space was decorated with balloons and streamers, and friends and family gathered to celebrate not just Gabriel's birthday, but the incredible journey that had brought them all together. Grace Sterling, now fully recovered and glowing with health, held her grandson while Sophie entertained the guests with a piano recital. Mrs. Harper bustled around, making sure everyone had enough to eat, her face bright with the satisfaction of a woman who had watched her family grow and prosper. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Victoria found herself standing in the same spot where she had first met Sophie over 2 years ago. The difference was remarkable. The cold, silent mansion had become a warm, loving home filled with laughter and music and the beautiful chaos of family life. Damien came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. Gabriel was asleep in his arms, his tiny fist clutching his father's shirt. "Penny for your thoughts?" Damien murmured against her ear. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," Victoria replied, leaning into his warmth. "Do you ever think about that contract? About how we started?" "Sometimes, but only to marvel at how wrong I was about what I needed." He turned her in his arms, careful not to wake the baby. "I thought I needed a business arrangement. What I actually needed was love." Sophie ran up to them, grass stains on her party dress and flowers in her hair. "Can we have another party tomorrow?" she asked breathlessly. "Why would we have another party tomorrow?" Victoria asked, laughing. "I guess we're a family, and families should celebrate every day." Victoria and Damien exchanged glances over their daughter's head, and Victoria saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. Sophie was right. They should celebrate every day, because what they had was extraordinary. "You know what?" Damien said, shifting Gabriel to one arm and reaching for Sophie with the other. "I think that's a wonderful idea. As they walked back toward the house together, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with desperation and fear, with a cold contract and impossible circumstances. But love had transformed everything, turning strangers into soulmates, a business arrangement into a beautiful marriage, and a broken man and lonely woman into parents who would do anything for their children.